You are about to listen to a discussion on how to actually live out your faith in Christ, living it out loud within our messy and busy lives. The content of this discussion comes from our Wednesday night crew, pastoral preaching notes, and the live small group discussions these notes prompted, something we like to call a community-based learning experience. Come now, chew on this with us.
How would you describe or define a hardened heart? That's right, a hardened heart. What would you say if I told you that phrase is used of the 12 disciples? This is Pastor Orleen Hasseltine, along with Pastor Robin Bjornson and our very own Otto Steve Lundy and Bruce Nelson, thanking you for joining us for this session of Chew on This. The topic we are discussing today under the When Jesus Speaks Through His Miracles series is when Jesus walks on water. When Jesus walks on water, yes, I see Jesus. And he's walking on the water. That song's going through my head all night when I was preaching. It's like, I see Jesus, but it's not retreat, so I can't sing it. That is specifically saved when we set up for women's retreat, because my stellar vocal cords only need to be displayed at certain places. But we did discuss this here with the Wednesday night crew on Wednesday night, August 26th. And we had a lively, wonderful discussion, and we could have used 30 more minutes. All the notes that are being referred to can be accessed on our website, realchurch.org/Wednesday night. So you can get all of the background commentary and check out if what we're saying is actually listed in the commentaries. So it is. They're our friends. With that, I would like to, by way of reminder, we are in the 9th week. No, we're in the 8th week. No, we're in the 9th week. No, we're somewhere. It appears I missed something. I'm looking at my numbers here. That this would be week number 9 if I'm looking at the chart, because we have 8 miracles. I said week 8. So apparently I have forgotten how to count, but that's what happens when COVID hits. Well, just blame it, just like when you're pregnant. You can blame all kinds of things on pregnancy, right, Steve?
I will.
Yeah. You ain't answering that. You're a smart, wise man. That gray hair means something. So we're going to need to adjust that, because this would make this topic week 9, because we have 8 of them listed, different miracles we've already discussed, talking about Jesus and the miracles that he did. Most of them we have taken out of the Gospel of John. All of them are listed in the Gospel of John, because John had this wonderful focus of describing these signs that Jesus did as a way to understand his character and see his messianic anointing, to see him as the Messiah, to see him as Yahweh in bodily form. And so he was very, very specific how he framed them and the ones that he included, because he was asked, of course, to write the Gospel of John after Matthew, Mark, and Luke were already written. And so he is specifically filling and describing things that he did not see that were already written in those 3 Gospels. So they're very, very specific. So we will go back through just a little primer here. First, the first one we jumped into was the wedding at Cana, which we find out that Jesus can transform. That's his messianic power, if you will. That sounds wrong. That sounds kind of like superhero type of thing, so I'm going to have to get a different phrase. Don't like that phrase. So Jesus turns the water into wine, and we see that Jesus transforms. Then we see that Jesus heals a nobleman's son with just the power of his words, so we know that Jesus' words are the power of God. And then we find Jesus healing an unbeliever at Bethesda, so we know that Jesus is, the point of that miracle is Jesus and the Father are one, because Jesus does the Father's will. And the side note is that healing is not based on how much you believe. News bulletin, healing is a gift of divine love. It is not something you earn by your faith, Amen. Just so you know. Amen. That's just a side note coming from a pastor's heart. Then the fourth one we looked at is Jesus heals a man that was born blind. He gave the guy and created brand new eyeballs. No other prophet, nowhere in Scripture is that listed with anybody else. It is just of Jesus. So Jesus is the only one who can give sight to those lost in darkness. Jesus created new eyes, so I'm going with Jesus has creation power. We see him in Genesis, and we see him here also, as listed in John, that he heals this man that was born without sight. Then we see Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, the pinnacle of, and when everything started to then fall down into the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ happened after that raising Lazarus from the dead. They didn't just want to get rid of Jesus. They were planning to get rid of Lazarus as well, because he's that walking billboard of Jesus is the Messiah, Jesus is the Messiah. So those happened, and then there was a private miracle where Jesus does this, blesses 7 of the disciples who are out fishing with this amazing large catch of fish. And what's wonderful about that miracle is he's dealing specifically with a group of people, telling them a message through that miracle. It wasn't this great big public one. It was one to tell them that apart from me, you guys cannot do anything, so don't freak out. Even though I'm in resurrected form, I'm going to ascend, and I'm still here. I'm going to help you. So that had to echo through their minds throughout their entire life here on this planet after Jesus ascended. And then we go to see another small miracle where Jesus heals Malchus's ear, listed in John 18. Where Peter chops off an ear in his enthusiasm to protect Jesus. And we see Jesus picking it up and putting it back on the guy's head and saying, whatever he does, and looking at Peter and saying, shall I not drink from the cup that the Father has given me? I'm going to be obedient. So through that miracle, we see Jesus' radical obedience to whatever the Father says he will do. So then we backed up the truck a bit and looked at some miracles that are listed in all the Gospels, or in most of the Gospels. And last week we talked about Jesus feeding the 5,000, which we estimated was 20,000, 30,000 or more people. This crazy miracle listed in all 4 Gospels, just crazy, crazy stuff. And what in the world was that? We know that the point of it is that Jesus provides. As the Messiah, he provides for his people. And we had this fun conversation about Jesus-sized dreams, having Jesus-sized dreams, that we can't say he can't do that because we see what he can do in his character, and he's still the same. This is our Jesus. He still provides even those amazing, can't get my head around Jesus-sized dreams. So that would be 8 different miracles. Today, on this episode of Chew on This, we're doing the 9th. So next week, whatever papers I hand you, everyone, we'll see if anybody notices. We're going to update all of the PowerPoint slides and say, well, somebody forgot a number. We're not sure who. So here we go. We are going to look at a miracle that is listed in 3 of the Gospels, in Matthew, Mark, and John. And you need all 3 of them to wrap your head around the entire episode about what is really going on. Because as we've discovered, miracles aren't just in and of themselves. Oh, here you go, cute, sweet little piece of Jesus candy, something special for you. We are finding that miracles are in the timeline of Christ. He is putting them in specific places to bring us to another place. They are there for a specific reason, to help with the faith of the people, to communicate a message, to move things on, to be a special embrace. They are not just happenstance. Jesus is doing all of this stuff on purpose. So we're backing up the truck here. We're going to be around the end of year 2 of Jesus' ministry life. And about a year from now, when this miracle happens, about a year later is when his death, burial, and resurrection will be happening. So he's getting ready right at the cusp, right at the point of spending that final year of his life. He spends most of that time with his disciples, those that are closest to him, helping them prepare and become and to take over the ministry that the Father has given him. He will be giving to the disciples. So this is where we encounter this story. Last week we talked about the feeding of the 5,000, 10,000, 15,000, 20,000, 50,000, and this miracle is right after it. So it's kind of like wait, there's more. You thought the feeding of the 5,000 was something. You thought those fish and bread things were. Hey, wait till you get a load of what's happening here. And it's interesting because this miracle of Jesus walking on the water was seen by the disciples and known by them, but it was confusing and wondering by the crowd that followed him, because he still had this big crowd of people that just, as we'll get into later in the podcast, but there's this big crowd around, but they didn't see it. They just had to, how did this happen? Jesus, you're kind of a crazy person. So how did this happen? So here we go. We're looking first at Matthew 14. Then we'll be looking in Mark 6, and then we'll be looking in John 6, because each one of them comes and adds more to the story, if you will. It gives us more details from another perspective. All righty. Anybody need to say anything before we start? Because here we go. We're going to be looking at Matthew 14, verses 22 through 33. And I think we'll stick with this one. I have it here in my Bible, but I think this one's a little bit bigger. And it appears this morning I need all the help I can get because I'm having a hard time counting. Yes. I'll tell you, Thursday mornings are always kind of like, hello, what did we do last night? Oh, that's right. We had church. We played hard. Matthew 14:22-33. Immediately after the feeding of the 5,000, he compelled, he forced, he drove, he required, he demanded the disciples get in that boat and get over to the other side of the lake. Because if you recall, and you heard the last podcast from week 7, which really was week 8, but it was week 7, the feeding of the 5,000, before that miracle even happened, Jesus was already trying to take the disciples to go have a quiet time and to unpack everything that had been going on, because the disciples were already sent out. The 12 disciples were sent out to minister like Jesus did. So he trained them, he sent them out, and they prayed for the sick, and the sick got healed. They prayed over the demon-possessed, and they were delivered. They ministered to individuals, and they're just like, Jesus, you're not going to believe what's going on. And in this whole mess, this is where John the Baptist gets beheaded. And so they're grieving the death of John, and how can that be? He was such a young man, and all of these things, and a society that doesn't understand good and doesn't understand righteousness and loving your neighbor, and so all of this stuff. But then they minister, and the people are amazed, and the people are realizing it's not just Jesus. Now his followers are doing this. All of this is going on. So they come to Jesus, and he's like, okay, let's go. And so they end up going, and the people see them getting in a boat to go to the other side of the lake for a retreat, and they decide to run over there, and they make it over there before they get there, and they are waiting, and when Jesus sees them, he has this compassion, and this is where the ministry that happened before he fed them, the
healings, everything.
The healings, the explanations, the encouragement, that you are worth something, the value that he conveyed upon people by spending time with them and helping them, that was all happening here. And then the miracle of feeding them, because that miracle spoke about his provision. No matter where you are, Jesus is going to provide through whatever means possible. So that was the miracle. So they have not gotten to that place of they need to rest. We're talking about self-care, phrase we would use today, which I think is just so funny. I put in my notes. Jesus understood self-care. Yay! This idea we need to, because this is a temporary vehicle, but it needs to be recharged. So you have to do something. Otherwise you are going to pay the price, and you will not be able to do what Jesus has asked you to do. So immediately he made them, you get in that boat, boys, I don't care, you go. And he says that I need to dismiss the crowd. You go, get in there. Now, some of the commentaries made the statement that he told them to get in there and wait, but if I'm not here by this time, then go. I don't know why they said that. It's like, maybe they're, I don't know, pontificating on human nature, wondering what a human, as a leader, I'll be here in a minute, but if I'm not, because I got to take care of the crowd, you go ahead. Because as we find out later, that is the only boat on this side of the lake. Everybody notices it. They said it was a bigger boat. It wasn't this really tiny thing that in my head we see in the pictures, that they're in my dad's fishing boat, you know? Mm-hmm. They're not in my dad's fishing boat. They're in a seaworthy vehicle. So he puts them in, and he demands that they go. The disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds, back in Matthew 14. Verse 23, and after he dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray, realizing what he needed to do to minister like he did and to live like he did. He needed to spend time in his Father's presence. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat by this time was a long way from land, and it was being beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night, somewhere around 4, 5, 6 a.m., in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, like, and said, it's a ghost! It's a spirit! It's something of the other world. And they cried out in fear. They were afraid of what they seen on the water. Now remember, they had been rowing and working at this, and they're tired and they're physically exhausted when they got in the boat. And so now they are beyond exhausted. And they cried out in fear, but immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, take heart, it is I. He said that phrase that is used back in the time of Moses and Aaron and the Pharaoh, where God gives Moses the name to use, say, I am has sent you. That phrase, I am, is what Jesus uses right here. So he's definitely telling them, God is here. Your heavenly Father is here through me. And he told him not to be afraid, or instead, oh, don't be afraid. He's like, stop being afraid. Stop it with the fear thing. I'm God. That's what he was trying to communicate with them right there. And here comes Peter. Yep. And by way of promotion, we are going to be studying the life of Peter in the fall here of 2020 on Wednesday nights. Somewhere, I think on the 16th is when we start, September 16th, examining his life and seeing, I don't know how long it will take us to do that. It always seems to take a little bit longer because somebody in this room really likes to study with information. So, and so here, that individual, Peter, will be touching back on this, I'm sure, throughout that series. He said, Lord, now the ESV, which I'm reading from, said, Lord, if it is you, that actually should be phrased, Lord, I know it's you. I know it's you, so command me to come to you on the water. I want to experience what you're doing outside of this boat. Because remember, they just experienced all this ministry stuff. It's like, well, if that's available, what about this water walking gig he's got going on here? I want to know what this is like. I mean, Peter had this amazing, I would say, an imagination, but the ability to encompass great experiences without putting human boundaries in them, because Jesus had no boundaries. I mean, his understanding of Jesus, I'm really looking forward to unpacking this together as we study. It's like, well, if Jesus can do it, he seems to have the understanding that's what he's telling us. We can do it as well. So he's like, okay, Jesus, command me to come out to you on the water. If that's your thing, this is something I know I can do. And so it says in verse 29, he said, come. So Peter got out of the boat. He's in a very good boat. I don't know how easy it was to get out of the boat. Like I said, it was a larger boat than we see in the pictures. It's not like he stood up and stepped out. I believe he had to climb up something, turn around, like you do in a bunk bed. You turn around and you climb down. I think it was something like that. That's just my imagination, right? My great nautical experience here. It's like, so Peter had to go through, he didn't just step out of the boat. He had to move around, get out of the boat, and walked on the water and came to Jesus. So there's Jesus, and here's Peter. Oh, Jesus. And he's looking at Jesus' face, and it's still storming, by the way, all right? So is it still storming big waves, or has it calmed? Because there's Jesus. So he came walking on the water to Jesus, but when he saw the wind, so it was still storming, he was afraid and began to sink. It's like natural human reaction. Lord, save me, Jesus, help, help. You were just walking on the water to him, Peter. What changed? Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying, oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? Why did you doubt? That's an amazing question that touches in all of the accounts that we'll be looking at this podcast. And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. Somebody turned the switch off. The storm was over. And those in the boat worshiped Jesus, saying, truly you are the Son of God. Now here in the Gospel of Matthew, this is the very first time that the disciples declare him as the Messiah. So they had the experience of the feeding of the 5,000 being the bread of life I can provide. But it's here in this personal whatever where it's like, you are the Messiah. Something had shifted. There is this relationship experience encompassed here. A lot of the commentaries talked about that this encapsulates what it's like to live now here in our day and having a relationship with Jesus, that there's no reason to doubt when Jesus is present. He's present and he's going to take care of the situation. Even though it may be storming outside your boat, he is there. And that we walk in relationship with Jesus. That's why we can do this. We can step out of the boat because he is there. And we can walk in that tumultuous, blah, blah, the salt water up your nose, all that. No, this wasn't the ocean. So the Sea of Galilee, there wouldn't be any
fresh water. Yeah.
Fresh water up your nose, seaweed up your nose. I mean, all of that we're still walking in relationship with him because he's out there in the water. He's there with us. It's like, little bit of fresh water hurts nobody. Just come walk with me. It's like, don't even notice it because it's not what I'm about. That'll take care of itself. Come, let's go love other people because that's what I'm about. So here we have Matthew's rendition. Now, it's interesting because Mark adds some important information in Mark 6:45 through 52. I am going to pick it up in the end of verse 48. He saw that Jesus saw that the disciples were trying to paddle in the wind and whatever, and the wind was against them. So at the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. And it says there in Mark 6 that he meant to pass them by. He was not going to get in the boat. Seriously. It's like, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Walk by Jesus. Yeah. Hey guys, follow me.
You can keep up. You paddle harder. harder.
But here, Mark gives us a little bit of different information, and he says they thought it was a ghost, and they cried out, for they all saw him, and they were terrified. But immediately spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid," or stop being afraid. Fear not. However you want to phrase that. And verse 51 says something really interesting. He got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased. And they were utterly astounded. For they did not understand about the loaves, the miracle of the 5,000. But their hearts were hardened. I don't want to read that there. I don't want to see that right there. That bothered me. It's like, okay, you are right in the mess, in the midst of this. You got some amazing miracles coming up, boys. But how can your hearts be hard? I mean, he just stepped out of the water he was walking on. So there was something. So there's my question. How do we define that? Well, wait, there's more. Here comes John. John adds some interesting information in John 6, verse 15. It talks about one of the reasons why Jesus demanded and moved the disciples along and took care of the crowds is they were so ready to make him and force him to be the physical king of the Jews so he could feed them. He's already proven he can get bread on the table. He can feed us, and now we're going to get rid of Rome, and he's going to be our king. And that was some of the energy of the crowd and why they were following him. And it's like, you're going to do it our way, Jesus. We have a plan. We're a community with a plan, and we know this way is right because it speaks to us. This is the way it should be. You're going to be the David that we all want. So, and he's like, they don't get it. You guys get out of here. I need to leave. So John lets us know this is part of the murmur of the crowd. This is part of the atmosphere Jesus is sensing. They don't realize it yet, but Jesus knows what's going on. So then in John 6:16, when evening came and his disciples went to sea, they got into a boat and started to cross the sea to Capernaum. The synagogue in Capernaum, some of this stuff coming up takes place there. It was now dark and Jesus hadn't come to them yet. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea coming near the boat, and they were frightened. But he said to them, "It is I," once again, Yahweh. "Do not be afraid." Stop being afraid. Then they were glad to take him into the boat. And immediately when he got into the boat got to the other side of the lake. That's what it says. And immediately the boat was at land to which they were going. So did they feel the G-force of that? Did they feel the drag? Did they have a physical sensation, or was it poof, poof, like you kind of see in the movies, poof, poof? Did he just go super fast and you feel that? That's my husband's boat would be that. He loves that feeling of speed. Or did it, I mean, we know that the storm ceased, but it said immediately. So John is letting them know at that moment we were here, and then boom, Jesus and the boat were over there. Let's not waste time. You guys need to rest. Let's go take care of this. So in the course of an ordinary day with Jesus, everything gets turned upside down because he doesn't have to operate by just natural laws. He understands how the supernatural can affect the natural. And it is now time that the disciples start realizing that they are supernatural beings having a very temporary natural experience. So they live in the natural, but they are supernatural beings having that very, very temporary physical experience. So, questions that I asked the group before we started into the rest of the story. Did Jesus set this up, this miracle up? Did he specifically send them away because he needed time away from everybody, but also because he wanted them to see this, knowing that they weren't getting the loaves and the fishes miracle thing, that he needed the disciples. Remember, that's his goal from here on out, is making sure those individuals, especially those 12, well, the 12, Judas gets removed and Matthias goes in, I think. That's right? That sound good to everybody?
Yep.
I think he's the one that, there's 2, they vote and that one gets in. So those are the ones he really, really wants to invest their understanding of being supernatural beings living in this temporary world. So is this set up? Do we think that, you know what, they're going to need to see me on the water? Or is it, I just need to be away, you guys go do your thing, and all of a sudden the storm happens and Jesus is like, well, now it's time, I got to go take care of him again. The kids need help. Sorry, Dad, we're done. The kids need help. So if you had a vote, Which one do you think it was? Is it just the ordinary happening of everything? And because this is part of the way Jesus lived, or is there this timeline where he's like, this needs to, the great catch of fish was a timeline miracle in my opinion. That was specifically for those 7 disciples because they needed to understand what happened at that time. But is this one that same type of thing? Or is it in response to what is all going on? And it just unfolded and he needed to get on that sea and go walk towards them. What do you think? What's your votes?
I'd say it was purposeful. I think he just recognized that, they come back, they've done all their miracles, casting out demons, healing people. It's then he does this feeding of the thousands of people in front of him, and they're still, come on, guys, don't you see who I am, what I am? All right, so maybe when he went up to pray all alone, God spoke to him, said, you got to get it through these thick heads of these guys of who you are. It's just, okay, here we go. They're going to get it now. It's then sends them out, and that's, I think, the whole story is to put it in that they finally get it, like it says that you truly are. They finally got it. I would like to have seen his face. Finally, oh, you guys.
That not Puddinhead, come on, yeah. Yeah.
These fishermen types.
That's an excellent argument for that. They're getting him to that point of worship. They needed to understand he was the Messiah. How about you, Pastor Robin?
I completely agree. Jesus knew what was coming.
Yeah.
And if anything was going to cause them to wonder, is he really God? Does he have the power? He knew what the enemy was going to be doing. And how kind of him to continue working with each one of these disciples and showing them example after example. I am not just, dipping in a bucket of glitter and sprinkling it all over the place, just for your entertainment. Strategically, you guys need to understand that all of the laws of physics, all of the supernatural laws, all of this bows to me. And you need to know this for where we're going. Because what's coming, you don't know the magnitude of, but you need to know that you know that you know that I am God. And having that solid foundation for what they were about to go through.
Because at that time, he would have been showing them doing miracle stuff for 2 years.
Yes. Yep.
So, okay, we're down to 1 year to go, and you still don't have it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, and the significance, and I, as a human and as an American, I feel like I suffer from, I am used to being in this body and I'm used to being in this frame. So the whole thing of do not trust what you see, do not lean in your own understanding.
Yeah.
And all they knew was to lean in their own understanding. And Jesus is just busting those paradigms all over the place. and you guys have been in that moment, no doubt, like I have, that I totally just biffed the significance of what was going on here. Yeah. I didn't
absolutely
get it.
Never, Pastor
Right?
Robin.
What? And so here's Jesus, and he's time after time after time layering. You do not understand the significance of what's going on here until later. And so I've been in that moment where my heart was hardened to the significance of what he was doing, and the revelation of it didn't come until later. And then it's like, oh. And so here are these guys living in this, there is so much more going on than we know, which I think is a huge gift of love for where they were headed.
Yes. I would concur. Yeah. This is an on purpose handling the ordinary of every day, but this is where this is going to fit. Okay, this will be a good lesson for this. So he had this very, what I would call a parental heart. If you've ever had the blessing of being able to raise children, participate in raising them, you're realizing this is who they are, but this is what they need to grow and to be healthy and balanced. So we are going to do this for them, or put them in this experience so they can figure out what it means to stand on their own 2 feet, or they can figure out and trust themselves that they can reason through things like this, or they have this amazing ability for this. So let's put them in the robotics class, or let's put them in the gymnastics, or whatever it is that child needs. You can tell they have so he's doing all of that with these individuals, figuring out what they need. And the interesting thing, echoes in my head because I'm getting ready with Peter stuff, right? Is that Peter is the one that denies Jesus 3 times, all right? So there's all kinds of stuff going on with there. And then how he reinstates him and the care that he takes. I have to ask myself, because he's so purposeful, what was their relationship like prior to all of this? Because he is being cultivated to be the leader of this. So Jesus is not, I mean, he knows. It's not like miraculously Peter's going to have all of this. He did get miraculous help, but Jesus did his due diligence in sharing and teaching and training. Mm-hmm. And so he spent time. So that's a fun question that we will be investigating in a few weeks. So here we go. We have the parties to the miracle, the people that are around the miracle. And we have Jesus. Yay, Jesus' part there. He's in there. And we have the disciples. It's on page of your notes, page 6. It's not in the slides. See, we have an organized sense of chaos or mayhem, organized mayhem when it comes to taking pictures of the board. Everybody, there we go, Mavis, Joyce, Paula. I did it this week. Remember to take the final picture of the notes. This is the brainstorming of the small groups. Couldn't get it printed this morning. I was getting frustrated, so I just put it in a Word doc and printed it because I couldn't print right from the photos because this person is not awake yet. So maybe that's why we're on week 8, 9. Somewhere in there, I forgot to change the number. So, all right. There's Jesus. He's a party of the miracle, obviously. And we just made the decision that we think this is a very specifically put in this place as a teaching and training experience for the disciples. And then we have the disciples who are a part of this miracle. Their fear was transformed into worship, which we all want that experience. Taking the do not be afraid, fear not, stop being afraid is basically what Jesus was saying. And that turned into worship through this miracle. And then we have Peter. Yep, we have Peter. He risked, he freaked out. He's so human. He's us. So there we go. We have Peter and the experience and how it outlines our relationship with Jesus today. So we get this wonderful little glimpse of what is going to be coming in the rest of the gospel. And then we have the crowd. This great big crowd that seems to just need more Jesus, and they follow, they show up, blah, blah, blah. And those are the different parties that we'll be looking at their interplay in the rest of the verses, because there's an awful lot going on here that Jesus knows this experience. There's more. There's more to the story. Now they're on the other side of the lake, and there's more coming. So when you look at the timeline, and Jesus holding this timeline of the miracles and teaching and training, but he's also dealing with what human nature wants to do, which you do not program, you respond to. And so he is doing that, realizing this is my goal, and these things need to happen to get here. And so he makes an unbelievable decision. And we talked quite a bit in the small groups about this decision. Why did he do this? And so we will get to that. Now back, just as a reminder, back in Mark 6, where it talks about he got into the boat, verses 51 through 52, and the wind ceased, and the disciples were utterly astounded, but they didn't understand about the miracle with the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. There was this underlying attitude in that group. There was something still there. That's part of being a human being. I don't like that. I don't want to know that it's been, like you said, Steve, 2 years, and they're still got this. How in the world could this be? So I need to define and find out what that word actually is talking about, because I don't want that to be me. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be that kind of human being in love with Jesus. I don't like that. So let's look at how we can define hard. And here is, I think, a beautiful example of a hardened heart from someone who loves Jesus. It's in Mark 8, 31 through 33. Now, keep in our head, back in Exodus, Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and Moses and the miracles, all of that was going on. So I think we had that discussion already last night before we got to this point, that Jesus was purposefully creating a connection here. So the manna of feeding the 5, 10, 15, 30, 40,000 people, whatever that group was, that definitely everybody made the connection to the manna that they said Moses fed us with, and Jesus corrected them and said, no, it's your heavenly Father who did the miracle. Yeah. Moses was the conduit, but it is your Father who gave you the bread. And so there is that connection. This crowd, everybody present here understood that. So Then when Jesus is walking on the water, the disciples get to see, all right, he's making a definitive, a very definite connection to the Red Sea experience, that the Spirit of God parted that sea so the nation of Israel could go forward. And he's doing the very same thing now. So I don't know if that's what helped them get to, as listed in Matthew 14, you are the Messiah, and they worshiped him. I don't know if they put all of that together because they understood their history. So making this connection again with what happened back in Exodus. And Jesus using the phrase, I am. He's using that Yahweh phrase. So all of those things go back to that experience and make the connection. And Jesus uses that as he goes on here in John 6, which are almost 2. But first we're going to look at the hard heart here with Peter in Mark 8, 31 through 33. Jesus is trying to prepare his disciples. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer. These are the things, getting them ready for his death, burial, and resurrection, and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. Okay? They're hearing this. They're looking at Jesus with their eyes crossed. And he said this very plainly. He was blunt. We're not going to speak in euphemisms. I'm going to be blunt and give you detail. And Peter took him aside. All right, so Peter is like, well, let's step in the other room. Let's step outside. Maybe they were outside. And began to rebuke him. It doesn't say what Peter actually said. It's like, you got to be kidding, Jesus. Seriously, this? I mean, he rebuked him. Don't talk like that. Where's your faith?
Where's your faith?
What do you say to Jesus? I
I don't know what he said.
I don't know.
But turning and seeing his disciples, Jesus seen the disciples were watching this, so he must not have went that far away. Mm-hmm. And he rebuked Peter. And this is what Jesus said, get behind me, Satan. Get behind me, Satan. He's looking at Peter and he's saying, get behind me, Satan.
Yikes.
For you are not seeing, you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. So this amazing encouragement, putting things in proper perspective, was Peter experiencing a hard heart experience and not knowing it. This connection of being very focused on what's going on in our present day world. It is so hard to see what's going on in the supernatural because we only see really dimly right now. It's really hard to stay when it's like, no, Jesus, you can't be dead. Seriously, we have staked our lives on you. You can't be dead.
You're going to be the king. How can a king be dead? You're not going to lead us and feed us if you're dead.
Yes, and so you're not making sense. Come on, let's get with it, or whatever. I don't know what you're talking about.
I'm laughing, because how often am this me? Just this whole idea of not catching the significance. Yeah. I mean, oh my goodness. Yeah, I have expectations of God, and you are not doing what I want you to do, is what Peter is saying. I have these expectations of you, and you're doing it wrong. Yes. What?
Yes. And so could that be? I mean, I hurt when I see that because it's so personal and it's applicable. When do my eyes get stuck on the waves in the wind?
Exactly.
Or get stuck on the things that, this is what God wants. I can say that with 100% confidence. But are my eyes fixed on this world, on our material, natural world, instead of what God is working out in the supernatural? So that was hard. Now John 6. I tell you, this guy, and he lists all of the guts of what's going on in this experience. So, all right, Jesus and the boat immediately on the other side of the lake. So we pick up the rest of the story. This miracle is definitely tied into what's going on here. The feeding of the 5,000, Jesus walking on the water, and what is being said here are all part of the equation. You can't separate them. Very, very specific. Jesus needed this, boom, 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 because he's up to something. Even though nobody seemed to quite realize it, they realized a piece of it, that they were headed in a very strange and different direction than what they all thought. So, on the next day in John 6, starting with verse 22, on the next day, the crowd that remained on the other side of the sea saw that there'd only been one boat, and that Jesus did not go on the boat with his disciples, but that his disciples had gone away alone. And other boats from Tiberias came near the place where they had eaten the bread after the Lord had given thanks. So when the crowd saw that Jesus was not there, nor his disciples, they themselves got into those boats and went to Capernaum seeking Jesus, realizing he went back to Capernaum and was probably hanging down in the synagogue. When they found him on the other side of the sea, they said to him, Rabbi, how'd you get here? When did you arrive? How did you teleport? How did you swim over here? What airplane did you jump on? Do you have a little sea skidoo thing?
Skidoo, Jesus on a skidoo.
Skidoo. And Jesus, I mean, they're trying to make sense. It sounds like they're trying to make sense of things. And Jesus tells them that, truly, truly, I say to you, you are seeking me, not because you saw signs, but because your stomach is full.
Yeah.
Because you ate your fill of the loaves. I took care of a physical need, and you want me to continue doing that. Do not work for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give to you. For on him God the Father has set his seal. He was making a huge delineation between those that love Jesus for what he can do for them and those that love Jesus because he's Jesus. And this is the point he's driving home through this whole loaves and fishes, walking on the water, and then these really hard words that are going to come. So this is a hard experience all around, but really focusing and magnifying on spiritual truths. We have to grapple with them. This is part of loving Jesus. Those things are hard. They're not pleasant all the time. They are the answer to who we are and what we are here for. They are the equation of our makeup and our DNA. But it's really hard because this world pulls us in a different direction, quite a few, almost all, a lot. And it's really hard to live what we would call counterculturally. Now, it's interesting to note that reading through the commentaries, there was this focus on the Capernaum synagogue. And they're thinking the stuff that comes after this, verses 28 and on, and John 6 goes to what, verse 71? I mean, everything that goes on in John chapter 6 they don't think it was a once and sit down kind of conversation, that they believe that Jesus moved around and said some of it here, said some of it. Did it all happen in one day? Could have, but it wasn't like this one standalone. So it was kind of like a roving, and this is why they think it was more of a roving conversation, because the congregation who doesn't believe in him, he addresses in verses 26 through 29. Okay? And then the preacher who calls for faith, that he's calling all of them to this faith, he talks about in verses 30 through 35. And then the congregation who does believe in him, that is where he addresses from verses 36 through 59. And then he talks about the cost of discipleship that blows the crowd apart. So they're thinking that he meandered a bit and people heard pieces. And I mean, so just trying to figure out that this didn't happen in our sermon setting, like what we see in our everyday. It's not like somebody up on the stage or up in the front behind the pulpit or the lectern giving this amazing, encouraging, confusing, hard to understand discourse. It is an individual walking amongst the crowd, being with the people, explaining things to them. So I think his approach, I could be wrong here, but I'm wondering if his approach was really different than other teachers, other rabbis, that he spent so much time working in and amongst the crowd that he delivered this way. Now we know the Beatitudes were preached from a mount position. So maybe this was the time with a message this hard, he assumed a different type of teaching methodology. I don't know. But it helps my brain as I read through this that he's reacting. He's walking through. Now, if we were in the auditorium, I would be walking and saying the rest of this because he's walking and talking and he's telling and he's moving amongst the people and putting together this sermon, if you will. So he has already delineated there's those who love Jesus for what he can give them instead of loving him for himself. Now, back in the 80s, there was this very divisive, insidious, and it's still out there, thing called the prosperity gospel message, which is not biblical. Yes.
Name it and claim it.
Name it and claim it. Yes, you go right ahead and email me, orlean@realchurch.org. Yeah, that's right. It's fine, because it's not biblical. Because keep in mind that John the Baptist died in his early 30s with nothing, and he is the most successful human being on this planet, on the planet. And if it's not applicable for all time, it's not an eternal truth. So this idea that you get material wealth because you live right and have the right kind of faith is a lie, and it's a pukey one because it creates illusion for you to believe in, and you end up loving yourself in self-aggrandizement more than you love Jesus. So you're stuck in the crowd here he's trying to get rid of. And that's the end of that mini sermon. We'll let that one go. All right, so this idea, he heard them grumbling about him. It said here in verse 43 that he's hearing the grumbling in the crowd, this murmuring, the complaining, and he keeps talking. No one can come to me unless the Father draws him. And then in verse 48, he says, I am the bread of life. So he's connecting everybody back to the feeding of the 50,000 people. Every time I say it, it's going to get bigger. Next time it'll be 60,000 people. Mm-hmm. And I'm the bread of life. And I believe he paused and he looked around. It's like, I am. You got yourself all up about the manna experience that you think Moses gave to you. It wasn't from Moses. It was from God, your Father. And that manna, I'm the manna. Oof. Seriously. Oof. I think because he's just done with, because he's a human and he knows how to communicate. So he's not just throwing glitter and saying, oh, no, I'm the manna. Your fathers ate manna in the wilderness and they died. This is the bread that comes down from heaven so that one may eat of it and not die. I'm the living bread that came down from heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. This is in John 6. And the bread that I give for the life of the world is my flesh. Okay, right now they're all getting really squirmy.
Yeah, what?
Yeah.
What?
And so here they go. The Jews disputed among themselves. So you know this is a walking, talking. People are moving. How can this man give us his flesh to eat? Oh, come on. This is not some kind of crazy cannibalistic experience. What's he talking about? And so he hears them. I hear you, boys and girls. So Jesus said to them, truly, truly, honestly, I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you.
What?
Now, I believe Passover was just over, and the crucifixion is a year away. So the Passover is fresh in their head. This whole thing about the manna and deliverance and the Red Sea, all of that is a fresh experience. So what in the world is Jesus doing? That's a horrible thing to say, because who in the world in this crowd is going to understand that, Jesus, you are not being a good teacher. You are not explaining. He says that in your face. And it's like, Then he goes on in verse 60. When many of the disciples heard this, they said, this is a hard saying. Who's going to be able to listen to this? And Jesus, knowing in himself that his disciples were grumbling about this, said to them, do you take offense at this? Remember the boat.
Remember the boat.
Remember the boat.
Remember when I fed St. Cloud Ministries?
Yeah.
That's
a great one.
That's right.
That's a great one.
So then what if you were going to see the Son of Man ascend to where he was taken before? What if you see me giving them a little teaser? Happen about a year and a couple months from now. It is the Spirit who gives life. The flesh is no help at all. The words that I have spoken to you are spirit and life. And about there, once again, I'm sure that the 12 disciples are like, we're done asking him questions. We don't get it. I know we're going to get it eventually, because this is how it goes with Jesus. We hear something, we grapple and wrestle, we figure out what it means and how it applies to life. And then in verse 66, it says this, and this is where we ended the teaching and moved into the small groups on Wednesday night. After this, many of his disciples turned back and no longer walked with him. So John is being very specific, giving us a feel of the crowd. We're on this walking sermon with Jesus, talking to many different groups of people. And so we get to the small group discussion, which we didn't have a whole lot of time because someone was really verbal. We really could use 2 hours, but it's not good because it doesn't work out that way. We're all tired on Wednesday night anyway, right after a long day of work. So I'm looking for my cheat sheet. It's in here. And the reason why I can't find it, I already put it in my binder, so I wouldn't be looking down on my paper. Yay, like I told you. Morning girl, she ain't. So here we go. Why did Jesus say something so hard for the crowd to understand and process? We're talking in your face. Like, just talk to the hand kind of thing. I know that's an old reference, sorry. I'm old. So why? That was our opening question. So what do you guys think? Why did he do that?
I think he was forcing a decision. One part of my brain is like Jesus is intentionally shaking what can be shaken, that what remain be solid. You are either solidly with me or you're not. And if there's a waver in here, that's got to be dealt with now, because what's coming cannot tolerate a waver. You will not stand there. And so he had an opportunity when in verse 60, this is a hard saying, who can listen to it, they say, but Jesus, knowing in himself that his disciples were grumbling about this, he had an opportunity in that moment to reframe if he wanted to. Because this is the line in the sand where Jesus, you go this direction and you've completely blown all the marketing plan, right? So he could have, all the promo is, Jesus is, oh, and look at great. And I just got through fixing all your problems. I'm your problem fixer, right? Isn't that great? And Jesus is forcing them to look at something different. And he could have backtracked and reframed it. No, guys, this is what I mean. But he takes that message and he goes even further. It's like he's pressing all of the toothpaste out of the tube. Nope. I'm not only going to say this, but I'm going to even make it crawl up your nose a little bit further. You have got to look at this, and you've got to be solid in it.
That was great. And that really goes along with what dear Mavis said.
Yes.
That was a process of weaning them off the milk.
Yeah.
Yes.
Time to take your first bite here, pals.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other small group last night made that same, making people think. He's going to extreme because he wants you to separate from where you're at and go somewhere else. It's like follow or leave.
Right.
End of story. He is not politically correct.
Right.
So it's like follow or leave, and not being divisive, but being clear, clarifying. This is what belief in me looks like. And if that's not what you want, I'm not going to sell you a load of anything to try and keep you around so you can be hangers-oners and give me money or whatever. I am not going to say something to make you like me. I want to tell you the truth. I want to tell you what it is like. What is the supernatural world like? This is life and death. Life and death on this planet is not life and death. Eternity is where all of this goes. And I'm talking to you about eternity because I want you to be in eternity with me. I'm not going to sell you a boatload of anything that isn't true. And I don't care how much you don't like it. It is eternal truth, and this is it. This is what the supernatural looks like. Believe it or not, I'm telling you the truth. And so whenever we delve into Scripture and we don't like it, and whatever, it's like, that's all right. Jesus knew we weren't going to. God knew, because our physical human self fights against what's in there, the supernatural truth. It's like, it's all right. It's a fight, and we know it. But it is truth. We are not going to tell you anything that isn't true. So everything in the Old Testament with that truth, and I got to tell you, when you read the Old Testament, you see humanity in all its glory. And all of what we can do as human beings is listed. They didn't leave anything out. They didn't hide anything to understand that God is in the midst of all that mess. So all of that energy is in Jesus here as he's saying this to their face. Unless you can grapple with this, because this was a learned audience. They knew their Yahweh history. You should know this was coming. This is part of it. And may I remind you, he's tired. And boom, here we go. We're done. I'm moving to this because I need to spend time with my disciples. It's going to take a year to prepare them for the hell I get to go through. I don't think he used that word, sorry. For what I get to go through and experience, because I love you. And in order for that to have this long-term effect that we're living in now, I need to go through this.
Well, and it's an interesting sifting, Pastor O, Jesus' recognition that there are many, many people warming themselves by his fire. Jesus has got a nice warm fire, and their tummies are full, and it looks like it's going to be this, and he's intentionally shifting and making a delineation, like you say, with where he's going to be spending his time. I'm not going to allow you to sit here and fool yourselves by warming yourself at a fire. I want to sift your heart so that you can be with me forever.
Yes. Yes. Very clear. You are not going to wonder what I'm saying and what I'm about. So then we went on to the next question, the hard choices. What is the hardest choice that you've had to make regarding your love for Christ? I mean, walking in a supernatural relationship with a supernatural being in a natural world creates a little bit of a struggle, sometimes a lot of bit of struggle. We know individuals who've been martyred for their faith because where they live is you're not allowed to have freedom of belief. And so because they don't agree with the ruling authorities, they are dead. They're dead. I have never come close to anything like that. Mm-mm. And I will be very thankful for the country I live in that I have not had to do that. So that is something that didn't come up. No one in the crew that was there on Wednesday night had that experience or had anyone in their family that type of experience. And yes, it still goes on today in 2020, and it will go on until this world as we know it is done. Because this world is in the hand of evil, and it wants to get rid of everything that resembles anything of Christ. So we know that is. So the hardest choice you've had to make, because it is filled with hard choices. The individuals listening and the disciples listening who stayed with Jesus had to realize everybody's going to think we're kooky. I mean, we are no longer going to be Jesus is the in guy. Everybody wants to follow him. He's got all these followers on YouTube and whatever, and he's an influencer, and he's all this, and hey, I'm wearing this because Jesus wears this. I'm wearing my hair like this because Jesus. That's all done. It's all done on purpose. He's like, go away. You got a booger on my finger, go away. I don't need to. So he said something so hard on purpose, but those who stuck there, why? I mean, what was it? Was it all those intentional miracles up to this point that they could see he was the Messiah, and now he's making them, forcing them, those that are going to stick with me are going to be the ones that are going to make it through the death, burial, and resurrection piece. Mm-hmm. So it's very strategic, on purpose. I truly believe his humanity's involved in it, because he's 100% man and 100% God, that he is tired. And it's like, there is nothing like a tired human being having to tell people to stop it, to add a little energy to what you're saying. You know, anybody who's had to direct a group of roving children who've gotten too out of hand with their play and someone gets hurt and all that. I mean, those feelings are there. It's like, you guys, we're done. I'm done with you showing up, wanting me to give you treats. I'm not a treat kind of Messiah. That's just not who I am. Mm-hmm. I want your life to change. I want you to know me intimately. I want you to love me and learn how to love me through the way I love you. I want a love-love relationship. This is not a love relationship. So those who could not grapple and grasp that, they walked away because he was no longer cool or in, or he said he wasn't going to give them free food anymore. Mm-hmm. And so, hard choices. What's the hardest choice you've had to make regarding your love for Christ? Steve, I know you had a good conversation in your group because I was eavesdropping.
Well, and someone there's loud talker too. I don't know who that is, but it's
it was a good group.
Yeah, Jess had a great one there, and that was. Then I thought, as soon as she said it, I was like, oh yeah, that was different there, and that was raising your children in this culture. Outside of the culture, they've got to be in the culture, and you got to protect them and teach them and show them. That's why we homeschooled for up until they're, I think, 7th or 8th grade or something like that, to protect them as much as we could. But it comes a point that they got to get out into the world and see the stuff. They were in Cub Scouts, Brownies, that kind of stuff, but that's not quite the same. And so that was kind of a tough one. It wasn't so tough on me. It was, I guess, tough on the whole family to really watch out what you're doing and set the example. But then the kids, when they started getting out there, they're coming home with questions about the world, and I'm going, and then to go through that was always tough.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Raising kids, and they feel so different, and you're not going to, because this isn't good for you. No, you cannot watch that. I gave the example of the sitcom Friends. Just a personal thing. My kids had to deal with me because this is just me. My house, you can't watch that. And it was really popular when our children were those ages. And it's like, no, can't watch it because it's a big fat lie. You can't live that way and end up with those kind of relationships because there's a price and a consequence when you do that. Not that somebody's standing in the supernatural flicking things on you, oh, look, you made a mistake. Or do it. It's like, no. When you fall in love with people and care for people and bond with people and do this, and then those things are wrested apart, you go through a grieving process that's really hard. And you don't pretend. Mm-hmm. You don't pretend all is okay. I mean, when people treat, and so the way they portrayed relationships, bonding and falling apart, was so inaccurate. Even if my kids did watch it when I wasn't home, which I'm guessing they did, we've never had a clarifying conversation. I'm sure they've seen some episodes because I was so vehemently against them. It's like, they know that I'm telling them it is a lie. That isn't how it works. You can't be watching that, and it does affect you. And it's like, so just didn't. And so I know that's just tiny. That was just a tiny little example of living counterculturally. It cost them something, but not a lot, but this idea of a hard choice. So there is that just being different. They felt really different. They loved going to the movies with their mother. They still do. Or watching movies with me, because I always tell them what's going on in the back. That's not true. Yeah, no, that's not.
That's a fairyland.
That's not. No, yeah, that's not good. That's a lie. They're trying to create the. So, yeah, we didn't do too much of that. Although we did go see Willy Wonka, the one with Johnny Depp, at the evening showing, and it was interesting. That's another story I'll share privately of what happened in that movie theater. Nothing to do with the movie, but the people in there. It was packed. And I tell you, people are weird. People are weird. So here we go back to hard choices. What's the hardest choice you've had to make regarding your love for Christ? I know individuals in my extended family who were disowned because their family grew up in a different type of belief system, and because they dedicated themselves to not a belief system but to Christ and going to different churches their family didn't approve of, they were no longer allowed to come home for family events and things because they were disowned, literally disowned. A parent even making a statement to a young man that, I wish I could take you being a drunkard or whatever. I'd rather have that than to have you being who you are right now. I don't. This is not what I want.
Wow.
And so I have not had to make that choice, but that is part of this topic of hard choices. That's what's going on here when Jesus is saying this stuff in John 6. It's a forceful, you are making a choice, this or this. And I have had some choices in my life that are hard, some that are really private, but they're hard. You're making a choice between this and this, but not like this. And so that is the atmosphere of what is going on here in this miracle. And they are walking away from it, understanding things now have completely changed. Everything that happens from here on out, it has completely changed with the disciples. They are now entering a territory that is so beyond their understanding, it really is outside of the boat. It is way outside of the boat. Yes. And so we come back to our closing. I mean, we have self-reflection questions that we probably won't even get to hear on this podcast. I made them all take out their phones and take a picture of the Tron, because this is where you take and apply everything that we've learned tonight. But there's just so much to say and so much information and talking, and so we didn't get to the self-reflection this time. But we did end with this. What is being communicated about Christ in this miracle? This is what John is after. He uses the word sign in the Gospel of John, not miracle, because it's a sign of Jesus' messiahship. So he wants us to ask after every miracle we see, how does this display his messiahship? And the small groups came up with, you either have more faith or decreasing faith. This whole experience, not just the miracle, but this whole thing in John 6, Matthew 14, and Mark 6, either your faith is increasing or your faith is decreasing. I mean, by this experience, you're going to know whether you believe in Jesus or not. That he is just in your face. Am I the Messiah or am I not? Make a decision. So there's a decision that has to happen. So that was one of the things that they brought up. What about you guys? Did you hear anything else? Something that you've personally reflected on since last night?
No, it was more just the sealing of to seal the faith of the 12 disciples there was, I think, his first big step, because once you have them and they finally get it, now the word can get out to everybody. And I think the crowds or the people, when they see that it's not just Jesus, it's now these followers, and they get it and understand it and can explain it to everyone else. And that's the beginning of the way.
Amen.
Yeah.
Well, and it makes me wonder, what was happening wasn't just for them. It's for time on end.
Correct.
We're at a hinge moment in history right here where things have been this way up to now, and all of eternity is going to shift based on what's about to happen. So the significance is just astounding. But I appreciate it here. You need to recognize this is, for me personally, for us personally, for you personally, forever, but you also have to understand there is actually no other option. I am He, and there is no other option. It's for me like bookends. I'm introducing you to this, but you ought, at the same time, you need to recognize outside of this, there are no other options but me, except hell.
Yes. Very definitive.
Very definitive, yeah.
Be interesting to know what kind of conversations happened 30 days after this, because they rested. I know they went somewhere and slept and ate and talked and didn't ask questions because they were scared of what Jesus would say.
Well, they had to be, they talk about being tired on the boat, rowing the boat. Well, no, you've got to remember they spent the whole day servicing, feeding thousands and thousands of people and cleaning up, getting the baskets, everything like that. Now he's going to make them out, go out and row a boat and get across the lake. So they're up all day. They're up all night, working hard. Because I know going through that, I've done that in my life at times. And after that, your mind gets a little wonky there after.
Yes.
And I wonder, too, that it could be a gift. They had just gone through this incredibly intense emotional and spiritual happening, and now they're getting an opportunity, even in the processing, to maybe work it out physically. Because sometimes after some of those intense things, it's great to do some hard physical exercise and just, flush it all out. But they were profoundly tired, I'm sure.
Yes. An amazing experience. But having to unpack it took the rest of their lives. All this time with Jesus. So as we close today, I just will mention the self-reflection. It's going to come up for those of you who are viewing this podcast. But are there any words of Christ that I find it hard to process? If so, how do I go about wrestling with them? When I'm reading Scripture, are there some things in the Bible that's like, I don't want this to be in here, Jesus. I don't want. And I got to say there is. It's an amazing conversation. I encourage those that were there last night to have those cup of coffee conversations with one another about that. The Bible's supposed to do that to you. It's supposed to bug you and bother you and poke at you because it's truth. Figuring out how it appeals. Because remember, the Bible wasn't written to satisfy our material, natural selves. The Bible is written to remind us we are spiritual beings having a temporary physical experience. And so you're seeing spiritual truth. Your physical fine self may say, I don't like that one. It's like, well, that's all right. It's still truth. Now figure it out. Deal with it. Don't pretend it's not there. And then can I relate to Peter's experience of trusting the Lord and then not trusting the Lord and trusting the Lord? And that wonderful walk of faith, how disorienting it can be, but exciting, and then losing it. And then can you relate to that? That would be a time of self-reflection because we need to be able to relate to that. If we're not stepping out of the boat, we're not pushing our faith. We're not exploring what it means to walk in faith. And what is Jesus revealing to me through this? How is he speaking to me personally through this miracle? So those are the self-reflection questions. But in closing, I just need to just bring out the question, okay? Is Jesus God or is he not? That's what I think he's saying. Am I God or am I not? Are you in the boat or out of the boat? Are you going to take and step out of the boat of your normal confines of what you think is truth? Are you going to step out of that boat and say, you're God, I'm following you. Here we go. Here we go. Is Jesus God or is he not? That changes the way everything happens in your life.
Thank you for joining us for this week's discussion on When Jesus Speaks Through His Miracles. Tonight, When Jesus Walks on Water. To enjoy this process live, come join us and the Wednesday night crew every Wednesday evening at 6:30 at Maranatha's Forest Lake campus. This is Steve Lindy reminding you to always be kind.